Well, good afternoon and welcome. I'm Michael Rivera. I'm the CEO of the Association for Corporate Growth, Los Angeles, a membership organization representing the middle market, private equity, and deal-making community of Southern California. I'm excited for today's panel discussion, which represents the initial collaboration between ACG Los Angeles and the Arcview Group, a network of high net worth cannabis investors who have raised collectively over $250 million for cannabis companies. While the cannabis industry can and does support vibrant conversations across a broad spectrum of topics, today's presentation will be a higher level survey of the current cannabis business environment, offering perspectives from an operator, an investor, and a policy expert. Now, to moderate the discussion, frankly, we could not have a better contributor. Kim Kovacs, CEO of the Arcview Group, sets direction and leads growth strategies for the Arcview Group, Arcview Ventures, Arcview Collective, and the Arcview Market Research. It's tough to say. Kim also serves as the managing director of Arroyo Ventures, an advisory firm connecting high net worth women investors with skillful entrepreneurs. Kim is a successful entrepreneur herself in the cannabis space, having founded MyJane, a wellness technology platform that was acquired in 2019 to facilitate broader product distribution. Finally, Kim was recently the president of the Los Angeles Venture Association, or LAVA. So with that, Kim, let's begin illegal to essential, ready to invest in cannabis.
Thank you so much, Michael. What a pleasure to be here. And just for a little bit of background, I was an ACG member in Orange County several years ago. And so it's just great to, have this affiliation and association with this group. It's such a stellar organization and just really appreciate it. Before I bring in my distinguished guests with me today, I just wanted to kind of go through and set the stage a little bit about, where the cannabis industry is right now and some of the key statistics or key data points that I think are important, especially for investors in this space, because there's a lot there. And to be honest with you, without having kind of a guiding star or maybe somebody in your realm who could really walk you through this space, it gets a little bit confusing sometimes. And so what I want to do is, first of all, just say a couple things about the market. First of all, cannabis spending is up. And COVID, with that, deemed cannabis going from illegal to essential. So it was deemed an essential business. And thanks to our partnership with BDSA, we've got some really good market intel data here. And the compounded annual growth rate predicted for the cannabis industry globally is just incredible. And so we're looking at this as being basically a $50 billion market by 2025 across the globe. Obviously, the U.S. sort of leading the charge in that cannabis marketplace. Something I wanted to point out here too, because we are kind of in sort of this NBA pseudo season right now. My husband's gonna be watching the Laker game tomorrow, but cannabis right now is outspending the NBA. So if you really think about the market in itself with regard to other types of products or categories, it's really an interesting thing to watch the trends. And again, if we look at where cannabis is going, we're going to be a bigger industry than the craft beer industry is right now. And so that's another sort of data point to look at. And this has happened before. So we've seen these accelerated, market opportunities, growth trends. And the only time we've really seen one very similar to cannabis is in the broadband industry. And so for those of us that could have rolled back time a little and said, hey, I wish I would have invested then, this is what we want you to think about right now, because this investing when is right now. And so we have so much going on with cannabis, both from a federal level, a state level, and a local level. And we're going to really unpack that today for you. And so what I'd like to do now is introduce my distinguished panelists, because they know way more than I do, or probably I ever will in this space. So the first person I want to at least introduce you to is Dov Shapiro, and he is the co-founder, managing partner, and principal at Entourage Effect Capital. And he's an expert across the industry with a focus in biotech, pharmaceutical, MSOs, and roll-ups. And he's had more than 20 years of experience as a senior executive, an investor, as an advisor, and a board member. And he's had significant investments in this industry, including High Times, BDSA, which is one of the companies on the first slide you saw, Loudpack, and Cannabis SAS, which was sold to Plena Global Holdings. So, Dove, please join me. The next person up is the Adam Smith, and he is the founder and president of the Alliance for Sensible Markets, which is a nonprofit coalition of business and advocacy leaders who are committed to a thriving, just, and sustainable legal cannabis industry. So since 1996, Adam has been on the forefront of the national and international drug policy reform. So this includes rolling back federal drug war legislation in the US, launching Students for a Sensible Drug Policy, and he's frequently published on his drug policy theses. And last but certainly not least, it is my pleasure to introduce you to Charlie Bechtel. So he is a true pioneer in the legal cannabis space, and he is currently the CEO and co-founder of Cresco Labs, which is a multi-state cannabis operator in 9 states with 15 production facilities, 29 retail licenses, and 19 dispensaries. And so for those of you who don't know Cresco, they are listed on the Canadian Stock Exchange, and I looked it up this morning, and their market value is $2.6 billion Canadian. Early in 2020, Cresco acquired Origin House for over $800 million, which was the largest public company acquisition in this space at that time. In his spare time, first of all, Charlie was named one of the top 100 cannabis leaders by Entrepreneur Magazine, and in his spare time, he serves as the adjunct professor at Northwestern University Pritzker School of Law, teaching classes on the legal and regulatory matters existing in this emerging cannabis practice. So, gentlemen, please join me. It's great to have you here.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, everybody, for having us.
Yeah, so Dove, so let's start with you. So you're an investor, you're in a PE firm in the space right now. So what specific types of companies and deals are you looking at?
So we, at Entourage Effect Capital, we have $150 million under management, highly diversified across portfolio investments in over 60 companies. And one of the key tenets for us and for this strategy is diversification across the value chain. And we're agnostic to industry segment, vertical, and geography. Our investment strategy has matured along with the market, and we're currently focused on more mature companies, companies that have demonstrated traction, that have demonstrated the ability to with a market fit, but significant in revenue with excess of $20 million and near positive cash flow. We currently have some concentration in California, so we're looking outside of California to diversify the portfolio in limited license states as well as medical-only states. We've had great success in the past with some very complex, distressed companies, and so we're also looking at companies that would benefit from a real active capital provider to partner with management teams to really solve these very complex issues in anticipation of federal legalization. So roll-ups are a key area for us right now.
Okay, fantastic. So Adam, let's go to you. So why don't you talk a little bit about what you're doing? And then also I'd like to have you kind of relay on sort of regulatory changes that are going on right now and how cannabis sort of moved from that illegal to essential, and maybe that top 2 or 3 things that you see as a shift that are happening now that could really propel this industry forward.
Right. So we have just launched, or publicly launched, because the work has been going on for a couple of years, a campaign called States Can't Wait. And it is about legalizing interstate commerce under an interstate compact. So it would be an opt-in for states. We're looking at producer states on the West Coast and legalizing states, particularly on the East Coast. And I think that to me is the major issue to look at in terms of investing going forward in this industry. When legalization happens, when federal legalization happens, states will no longer be able to have siloed industries. You can't keep California oranges out of Florida. It's unconstitutional under the Commerce Clause. And so we are heading toward a situation where there will be interstate commerce, whether that's next year, as we hope to make happen, or whether that's when federal legalization happens. And so being aware of the companies that are prepared for that to happen versus companies whose business model depends upon those siloed industries for their profitability, I think, to me, would be the single most important thing in terms of long-term investing in the space.
Fantastic. So Charlie, let's talk about being a multi-state operator. And so what do you see as sort of the advantages and disadvantages, in this market, being a multi-state operator?
Yeah, it's a great question because there are both. There's no doubt about it. And anytime that you're operating in an emerging industry that's also highly regulated, it's complex. There's difficulties. I say it all the time. If you're not somebody who loves the challenge of finding elegant solutions to problems that pop up, this is not the industry for you. But I think that's true for any emerging, highly regulated industry. So I think the value, in the sort of the benefits, the pros of being a multi-state operator is diversification. It allows you to really start to establish the brand play, which I think from my perspective, and I think it's a perspective that's widely shared throughout the space. In the long term, cannabis is a consumer packaged good. It's establishing itself as having the elements and the traits of a consumer staple here in an economic downturn. And as you start to look at industries that are classified in that consumer packaged goods category, branding and distribution is the long-term value. And so I think you'll find, whilst there's slight nuances, I think you'll find a lot of similarities in the approaches of larger players in the space at this point, where the future of the industry is the consumer packaged goods approach. So building brands, building distribution is very important. Cultivation, manufacturing, brick and mortar retail, sort of all verticals of the value chain play a very important role right now. But I think long-term value in this industry is created through brands and distribution. So multi-state operations allow you to establish brands and distributions in this current, very fragmented, as mentioned, siloed state by state structure that we currently operate in.
So are you in favor of this Multi-States Act that Adam was mentioning?
I don't know that he brought that up, but interstate commerce compacts. Look, I think interstate commerce is an inevitability. I think it's a matter of when, not if. I think me and him may have a steak dinner pending on when that date occurs. I don't know that it's that far off in the future. I just don't know that it's 2021 either. I think there's a lot of wood to chop. We saw it with a proposed vote on the MORE Act being delayed. I think that announcement was today. When you're talking about change at a federal level, I think we've been advocating for change at a federal level now for a couple of generations. It's very difficult, and so there's a lot of work to be done. I do think that we are near the time when we're going to have material changes happen at a federal level. When interstate commerce comes is TBD, but it will. There's no doubt about it.
So I want to kind of maybe bring this one back to maybe Dov and Charlie a little bit, since we know we've got a lot of investors who are listening in today, folks who are running PE firms and, even ancillary, sort of service providers, as we call them, ancillary to the business of cannabis, and they might be interested in getting into this. So we saw a lot of sort of shakeout with the public markets. Charlie, you're still a publicly traded company doing well, knock on wood, congrats, this is great. But a lot of them didn't make it. We saw a lot of devalue in that trek to the Canadian space. So what about privately held companies? What kind of areas would you say right now are good for investors? And should they jump in now or should they wait?
Charlie, you want to go first or you want me to go?
Look, you'll have more perspective on this than I will. I can only tell you from the publicly traded or sort of well-established organization standpoint. I think investors have wanted to see results. They want to see execution. They want to see operational execution. And so I think Q2 was a big quarter for U.S. cannabis. I think Q2 is the first quarter where we saw, I think, all of the big four post revenue higher than anybody in Canada. So you're starting to see this sort of inflection point that everybody thought would come. But again, you have to show the results. You have to put not only the top line up there, but you have to have solid bottom line results too. So again, with all four of the sort of the big four companies either being cash flow positive or near cash flow positive with their Q2 numbers, you're starting to really see the U.S. Industry develop itself into what everybody thinks it will become. But it's really important to understand those that can execute versus those that are still, maybe pre-operational and a little bit more aspirational. And I'll hand it over to Dub now for more insight.
Thank you. So first, we have a very long-term view in the space, right? So with that said, and with what Charlie said, with the caveat that with a few specific companies of which Charlie is one of the few players in, we were never an advocate for companies going public at this stage of the game, right? Too many companies went public before they had a proven management team or a proven business model or any visibility into future performance. And so this was really venture public capital at its best, right? I mean, this was not, in our opinion, the right way to go about it, except for a few very sophisticated operators, right? Like Charlie communicated. But we see a lot of similarities to the late 90s, the dot-com bubble and bust, and some parallels. We're also very mindful that the total addressable market is not that of the tech companies that we're seeing multi-$100 billion or trillion-dollar companies, right? But with that long-term view, we are firm believers that over the next decade, there will be in excess of $1 trillion of market capitalization generated in the cannabis industry. And so we arrived to that by looking at whether you want to look at it as some of the slides that you posted up came as to the total revenue of this addressable market, whether it is in 2030, maybe $100 billion, whether you include the illicit market that some people put it at 50 billion, some other people at 100 billion. So when you distill that and you bring that to the EBITDA in an industry that as it matures should garner very strong EBITDA margins, you extrapolate any multiples, whether it's either revenue or EBITDA in the categories as CPG, in the case of what the example that Charlie gave, whether you want to use tobacco, alcohol, or other industries, and you arrive to that $1 trillion+ of market cap. So as a result, we believe that we're going to see a tremendous wave of consolidation over the next couple of years. Some companies are finally making that turn from that private market ability to move to the public market, and so when the federal the market becomes federally legal, I believe it's going to be about scale, right? So companies that are going to be traditional big players are going to come in, and the decision whether to build or buy is going to be primarily focused on those companies that have demonstrated the ability, that have the platform to be scaled. And on that note, as I said earlier, we're actively looking at orchestrating, structuring, and leading roll-ups in this space.
Yeah. Well, one of the companies that was an early investment by some of our members at Arcview, Springbig, and they just got a $9 or $11 million investment led by TVC, which is a group out of San Diego. This was their second technology investment that they've done. They just did it this year. 4 years they've been looking. And so for TVC to jump in, and by the way, Springbig had a pre-money valuation of like 90 million or something already, ERP system in the space, and building tech. And what, let's be honest, the big tech players aren't in this space right now. So this is really a great land grab and time for them to, build that value. I don't want to say in sort of in a protected way, but it kind of is in a protected way. So Adam, let's talk about protected ways. I mean, so we've got, like you said, the states are kind of operating independently and siloed. Globally, same thing, right? We're not bringing in imported product of cannabis products from different areas. So let's talk a little bit about that, and let's see what does this look like? I mean, let's say we do have, the commerce going and we have the regulations going. What does this do to these multi-state operators too?
Well, it very much depends on what their vision was of the future of the industry and what the timing of that was, right? It's an interesting space because coming out of illicit markets as it came out of and operating under state law and with federal prohibition, you talked about tech companies in this space being protected from big tech, but everyone has been protected because there are giant companies, especially publicly traded companies, whose teams of lawyers would not let them get anywhere near cannabis. And so there's something that I think has been very good and has really given small and medium-sized businesses a chance to operate, because we haven't seen the companies that are big in cannabis are not big companies. I think the number that we have this year, it was 16 or something billion dollars for the total revenues in the space in the U.S. Well, in pharma, $16 billion in revenues is about the 14th largest company in that industry, right? And so pharma has not gotten in a real way. I mean, we can debate around the edges, but we have not yet seen that. And so I think right now the protection that we're seeing is, I think, less beneficial than the broader protection, right? I think the state silos are less beneficial because it really encourages investment in hard assets in particular that may very well not be competitive when those walls come down, right? And so, I mean, if somebody handed you, $30 million or $40 million right now and said, you can sell it anywhere, go set up a cannabis production, operation, you would not do it in New York or New Jersey. All right. There's just absolutely no way. And so, so the protection, I think, in a way, is warping the economics of the industry. And when we get there, it's going to show out a lot of people's visions and what they plan for and whether they were right or not. Before I stop, I just want to thank you for having me, which I didn't do initially. I'm so pleased to be part of this panel, and especially with Dove and Charlie, who are, serious, smart people in the game. And I'm pleased to be here.
So are serious, smart people. Hey, Charlie, so I want to ask you next about supply chain. So one of the things that I hear a lot from investors, especially coming new into this space, is, the supply chain and, there's so much inconsistencies and, product qualities. And so let's talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, to talk about supply chain is kind of to talk about the patchwork fabric of the regulatory structure of the industry as a whole. I mean, like the silos that we keep referencing, that in and of itself just destroys the traditional idea of what a supply chain is, right? I mean, these are self-contained islands that you have to operate in. So there currently is no such thing as an established secure supply chain from a likely place where that type of supply chain would be developed out west, California, high desert regions, Arizona, up to Oregon, Washington, et cetera, and to be able to travel across state lines. So every one of these markets is unique, it is independent, and it has an absolute impenetrable currently wall that you can't bring anything in or out of. So you have to establish a supply chain in each one of these states, from seed to truly sale. So, as we were approaching the industry and prioritizing those middle two verticals of the value chain of creating branded products and being able to distribute them, you can't do that in today's cannabis, at least, and definitely not in like 2013's cannabis industry, without being vertically integrated, because you're going to have to be if you want to be in Illinois, if you want to have your branded cannabis products in Illinois and distribute them to all the dispensaries, you need to have a cultivation manufacturing license in Illinois to grow it and to harvest it and manufacture products out of it. You're starting to see, in some of the more pioneering markets, I would say supply chains that are getting closer to being what you would think of as an established supply chain. But I still think for a variety of reasons, regulatory complexity, lack of capital, et cetera, we're still very far from having what any traditional CPG organization would consider a secure, safe, quality, reliable supply chain in any of our markets that would meet their standards to where they would decide, I don't need to be in that category. I could source it from X who can meet my specs, who can meet my timeframes, who can meet my reliability standards, and also do it cheaper than I could do it. That's still in development. And again, some markets are further along than others. Other markets that have had more open licensing structure and a lot more examples of operators that have been established and refined their crafts may be further along in establishing that traditional supply chain, but it's still at the early stages.
And how's it working in Canada? Is that a model that we're going to look to, or not necessarily?
You know, I would hesitate to comment on the Canadian market. I'm pretty laser focused on the U.S. I don't know if any of the other panelists would have more insight there.
Okay. They are our friends to the north. I do know that. So, Dub, let's talk a little bit about, okay, so you're an investor in the space. Another thing I've heard a lot of from others who are really looking into this is, well, first of all, am I protected being an investor in this space? I'm going to put money into a company, is there going to be a reach back because it's still federally illegal? What's the chance of that happening? Or there are things that I can do to protect my investment? That's number one. And then number two is we're in a election year. So what is that changing your lens at all on what you're looking at in the space?
We believe that regardless who wins the election in November, we're past the tipping point. So that kind of answers a little bit both the first part of your question, the second. That is a tipping point that affects that what you call the people coming and grabbing it back. We don't believe that can happen at this point anymore. There remain only 8 states where marijuana is fully illegal. And a few additional states where there's only CBD legal, like Texas and Georgia. So think about how far we've come in a short period of time. Well, short and long, right? Because too long being federally legal. We believe that we're going to continue to see a public sentiment shifting towards legalization. And this industry, especially now with the pandemic, has generated so many jobs and has contributed to tax revenue at a time when industries are collapsing, at a time where states are at an all-time high of budget deficits. And here's an industry that is federally illegal, yet at a local level considered essential, contributing in a very big part to helping local governments basically get their coffers in order. And so we believe that that beyond the financial benefits, and here's I think the work that Adam is doing, and large players like Charlie's and all the other MSOs are I think behind this mostly. It's so beyond the financial benefits, we believe that the history of prohibition is abhorrent to most of us in the industry, right? So there's a huge social justice issue that I think it's time to make amends for in federal policy. When is that going to happen? Look, I'm looking forward to joining Adam and Charlie in that stake as soon as next year. But frankly, it's going to be more about that regardless of what happens in the election, it's going to continue to be legislation at some level that will trigger very, very interesting catalysts for investment in the space, right? I think that's how we see it. There are so many catalysts in line, whether it is access to banking, whether it is normalizing R&D. So Think about the comment that Adam made about pharma companies, that they're nowhere near being a part of the industry. They cannot do proper R&D, proper clinical trials, normalizing taxation, so that companies that are operating like any other business don't have to pay a triple tax that is unique to this industry. So taking it all together, we believe that the train leaves the station, and it's really a great time to be in this, albeit very, very complex industry.
So Adam, go ahead, Charlie.
Sorry, and then to Adam, and I think Adam will have some great perspective on that. I think just for the benefit of the audience and understanding the audience and the perspective that they're looking for here, and why an investment in cannabis is an interesting and wise investment at this point in time. The catalyst that Dove was just talking about, and from a political perspective, and we're at Cresco, we're very engaged in the government affairs side of this business. I think that's really what actually attracted myself to the industry. Cannabis itself, we can all debate on how this is going to move forward. I think the one thing all of us will agree on is it's moving forward. As Doug said, the train has left the station, the horse has left the barn, however you want. You have critical mass. I can tell you from my involvement as chairman of the NCR, which is a National Cannabis Roundtable, the conversations, the offices in which these conversations are happening, the doors behind where these conversations are happening are doors and offices where the conversation of cannabis has never happened before at this level of interest and at this level of engagement. And while I think we, again, could debate the benefits and the pros and cons of what happens in November as far as how it impacts the future of cannabis, I think all of us can agree that there will be beneficial movement as it relates to cannabis at a federal level, regardless of what happens in November. And the Senate side or in the executive branch, I think cannabis has done an incredible job of putting itself in a position to be seen as potentially accretive by both sides of the aisle. As Dove mentioned, you've got these social equity, social justice related issues that have always traditionally been part of cannabis. But now I think you've got, from the conservative side, from the R side, I'm not aware of an economic engine as strong as cannabis is. So as we're dealing with what we're dealing with as a nation and as an economy, when you're looking at something that can literally create over 1 million jobs in the next 2 to 3 years, hundreds of billions of dollars in total economic impact, and over $100 billion in tax revenues that are new, that are literally out of thin air tax revenue. I don't know of another opportunity like that. So you're speaking the language of both sides of the aisle, depending on how you want to look at cannabis. And I'm sure Adam has more to add to that conversation too.
Hopefully it makes Adam's job a little easier.
Yeah,
he's invited to both sides of that aisle now, right?
It's so interesting. First of all, I totally agree that this is moving forward, that this is a really terrific, interesting time to get involved in this industry. I might not have said that 5 years ago. I actually didn't think that 5 years ago, but now I think is a terrific time. There's some track record and some traction, and not only are the doors opening at the federal level, but the states, the governors have been champions for this issue. Governors who 5 years ago didn't want to touch it, didn't get behind ballot initiatives in their states, wouldn't push legislation through their state legislatures, are now champions of this industry, right? And as we talk about opening up markets, right, and to Charlie's point, that there's very few industries in the private sector in the United States where, with a small policy change, if we can right the supply chains, right, if we can allow markets to function as they are meant to function, without a bailout, without government spending money, the minute we can move product from producer states to consumer states, two things will happen. In producer states, you will see valuations of almost every producer in those states increase by multiples almost instantly. You'll see a wave of investment, expansion, and jobs, right? In consumer states, particularly consumer states that are about to legalize or just legalizing, you will see the opportunity to get supply chains established and an industry up and running in 6 to 18 months versus 3 years to 5 years to 7 years, as we've seen before, to get those supply chains going. And so you will see a wave of investment, business formation, and jobs. And the governors, more than anyone else, have an interest in making sure that there's some economic activity in the midst of this crisis. And so a lot of this is going to be driven at the state level, even toward even as it relates to what we think of as federal policy, right? The DNC didn't recommend legalization, but they recommended letting the states take the lead. The Bernie Biden committee did the exact same thing. And so I think the governors will have a big hand in helping push what federal legislation they need to make the economic benefits happen.
I want to say something really interesting, because this is a little bit of a SoCal audience here too, because ACG LA covers a little bit of Southern California, Orange County, another chapter, but Anaheim, so city, Disneyland's been closed. Disneyland is the largest tax, base for Anaheim, and they're struggling because now they have like a 15 or 20% unemployment rate for the first time ever in that city. So that's compounding this problem. And they're like, cannabis. Cannabis could be the answer, because our sister city next door, Santa Ana, has all 19 dispensaries. That's the only allowable place in all of Orange County. And so they're really looking at that, and they're saying crime went down in Santa Ana, surprisingly, did not go up because of cannabis. Santa Ana has now more money to put into social programs and all these other things, and they are not reliant on, this sort of one singular tax base of like South Coast Plaza or a Disneyland or something like that to bring in this money. So I think, Adam, to your point, is that that's just the states, but you bring it down even to these local municipalities where they're like, we are really hurting from this, and what are we going to do, right? And that, I think, is going to add a lot of pressure up to the state level, which then hopefully, gets to the federal side. Really interesting stuff. I know we have a few minutes because we want to open this up for Q&A. So I just want to kind of throw this out here for like each of you. We all kind of think right now is the time. I agree with you, Adam. 5 years ago, I wasn't even looking at this industry. A couple years ago, I made my first investment. I probably should have done a little bit more research on some of the things I invested in. Knock on wood, I'm at Arcview now, so I can do that with a group of people. But what advice would you give to somebody who's just about ready to get started? What would you say to them? What would you say would be part of the industry you would look at? Go ahead, Dov. I'll let you get started with that one.
A couple of questions packed in there, but
yep, I like to do that.
It's okay. It's good. I think that some advice that I think it's pertinent, and I believe that anyone who's been investing in the space like we have since 2014, we've been at the forefront of investing in the space since then, and we've seen so much complexity, as I said earlier, and both Adam and Charlie articulated, that I would say don't go it alone. Some benefits that Arcview brings are at a higher investment level are brought by firms like ours, for example. So we have not only the time and the wounds to prove it, but it's very difficult to pick a single winner in the space, right? So this diversified approach within a fund that has dedicated resources, that has forged relationships with the likes of Adam and Charlie and the professional service providers in the space, would really save a lot of headaches and probably a lot of losses to someone coming in new. That's on one hand. I think that, and we don't have to go too far. I mean, the moving to the next part of the question is, where would you look? And you brought up a really good company. We know Jeff very well, Spring Big. So technology is something that is very transferable. If you are still, to your earlier question, where should you put the money? You don't want to touch the plant. Technology or ancillary services allow you to participate in the space and really go across state lines, right? In some of these companies like Spring Big. But overall, as I said, we are committed to the space, and we believe that people should go in with a team of professionals rather than just try to go at it alone right now.
All right, who wants to take that one next? Charlie?
As far as upside,
Where do you place your bets?
Where would I place my bets? Look, again, I'm
Cresco.
Obvious choice. I think there's plenty of opportunities in what is kind of always been referred to as the pick and shovel categories, right? The third-party service providers, the software plays, all of those are relevant, because as long as there are these barriers to entry, the traditional service providers are not in this space, and it does create this vacuum, this opportunity for creative and forward-thinking organizations to get set up and sort of fill that need. And then once there is that loyalty and that track record of success built, it's likely that'll continue. I do think, looking very broadly and narrowing it down, I think the first, and again, from my perspective, having looked at the industry since around 2013, U.S. cannabis, I think, is probably the easiest choice to make here. There's a lot of ways you could look at cannabis. I think the U.S. market is clearly, it is going to develop into, it's going to continue to be the home of the cannabis industry. There are international plays. It's definitely a global industry that's going to be developed. But I think, like most traditional CPG, you're going to look at what happens in the U.S., and that's what's going to be interesting and sought after around the world. So I do think the opportunity in the U.S. is establishing itself as the clear path forward. Once you get past that, then I go to execution. Then you start investing in people and teams. You start investing in track record of success, because there are still a lot of opportunities that will not come to fruition, that will not materialize in the way that the pitch deck appears to present itself. So, I think Dove's advice is very solid. It's very solid advice.
I would love to see one of those pitch decks that match from the first to the last. That'd be awesome. Yes, indeed. Adam, what do you think?
Well, I mean, I would double down on what both Dove and Charlie said, and I would say something else, and it's gotten better. But you really need to be aware of who the management is in this industry. It is still an industry that has come up in some large measure out of the illicit markets. That is not entirely a bad thing. It gives us some soul, but there are people who have not sort of been wiped out in this industry who are less than reputable. I know that there are other industries that have people who are less than reputable, but for a few years, cannabis was sort of the place that people that got washed out of other industries and had access to something showed up here. And so, to Dove's point of having a team and being diversified and knowing, not going it alone, there's there's still quite a number of snake oil salesmen in this industry, and knowing who your management team is just absolutely life and death.
Couldn't say that better. And look at the group we have right here. I mean, all three of you are just stellar backgrounds, incredible. I mean, none of you sort of came up through the cannabis industry yourselves, and now you're leading, large organizations and making change, for this industry. So I appreciate that. I really do, because it's a hard one. I mean, when I first got into this industry, I had a lot of calls to make. I was on a couple of boards, and one of them I had to resign from because I could not continue that board seat being in the cannabis space. And so it's a tough decision still, I think, for a lot of us. But I showed that slide earlier. I mean, I wish, or I'm not going to wish, I'm in it. I'm not going to miss out on another great, landslide opportunity as an investor to come into a space that's really just at the sort of beginning stage, and to start to frame what this looks like on a, U.S. first, and then global scale. So I think it's fantastic. I know we're going to do Q&A. I'm not sure if we're quite ready for that yet, but it's about quarter till, so I just want to respect everybody's time. So I have Laura here from the Arcview group. I think she's going to field some of the questions that you guys have. I forgot to mention this at the beginning, but if you have a question, please put it in the Q&A. And if you have somebody specific that you would like to answer that question, please indicate that, or we'll take our best guess at who should answer those.
Thanks so much. So we have some really great questions. And like Kim said, we'll try to get through as many as possible. And we'll start off with a question from David Brock. So this is for all three panelists. What is the time frame for listing on the major exchanges? And is the Safe Banking Act the most likely short-term avenue?
So in our view, there's going to be different paths to that. Obviously, federal legalization would make it automatically possible, but we believe that the Safe Banking Act might trigger that. So anything that will allow traditional banking, I think will ultimately be the first domino to fall, to make trigger that to be the best domino to fall. But we're looking forward to that. We need some major exchange so we can have real volume. I'm sure companies like Cresco would really benefit from traditional capital markets, traditional banking. So, but we've started to see some real banks already offer what would be deemed somewhat traditional banking services.
Yeah, I'm ready for the rest of them. And I think just on the question specifically, what's the time frame? I've said it before, and I tend to be optimistic. And again, I just sort of feeling the way where cannabis is sitting. Adam made this point earlier about the not to get too far back in the weeds, but to take one step back. Adam mentioned it earlier that the states are leading this charge, right? The governors are really leading this charge. And in my experience, in the way that I've felt cannabis develop and cannabis regulation and legislation develop over the last now 7 years at a state level, it's starting to feel very similarly at a federal level to when we saw these changes take place at a state level. When cannabis finds itself in a position where the question stops being why would I do that and becomes why wouldn't I do that? That's when you start to see this change happen, and I think that's what we're seeing at a federal level. So I was on a call the other day with an analyst, and they asked a similar question, and I said, look, if I'm just giving you my honest opinion, this is only Charlie Bachtel's opinion. I said, if we're sitting here 12 months from now and we don't either already have the legislation or the modification in place that will provide that path forward, or a very clear understanding of when that's coming, I'll be disappointed. So that my time frame is I think, look, part of and I don't like to trade in rumors or hearsay, but with some of the modifications or some of the changes that were even announced today, as we talked about earlier with the MORE Act, it was followed by there's a continued sort of potential here for SAFE to be this dark horse that actually rises to the top before the elections. So, I mean, that's the kind of momentum, that's the kind of, sort of near the finish line sort of progress that has been made on SAFE to date. This thing has been discussed, it has been analyzed, it has been debated, it has been prepared to be a very viable path forward. So, I think the time frame I would say is within 6 to 18 months, and if that doesn't come to fruition, I think you'd see a lot of people that were reasonably disappointed, because I think that's a reasonable expectation at this point.
Adam, anything more to add to that, or we'll go to the next one?
I wanted to find a way to get this in because I think it's important. We touched on it just briefly. If you're coming into this space as a prospective investor, I think it's important, I think it's important for everyone in the space, but you need to understand that this industry comes up out of 80 years of prohibition. And to the extent that there are people now and companies now that have their fingertips on the bag of gold and are just about to reach for that, that gold, the reason that they are reaching there is because they are standing on a mountain of 80 years of ruined lives and destroyed communities. And if you are not, if you are a company in this space, if you are an investor in this space, and you are not accountable to that history, and you are not taking that into account, if you're just here and I'm going to get the money and what happened before it didn't happen, then you are straight profiteering. And I think that most people in this space that are the mensches in this space, the people who really are true to that and understand that there is a history here that needs to be and that needs to be accounted for. And when you look at the MORE Act, 10 months ago, the MORE Act was not the leading piece of legislation, right? It was a sort of a wish list of the left but the truth is that given the view on what has happened, in social justice, we are now looking forward, and I think it's a positive development that something like the MORE Act is likely to be the thing that goes forward. It's going to be much harder to get something that goes forward without social equity. But as an investor, understand that there is a moral responsibility that goes along with getting into this space.
Thanks. All right, so for our next question, this one's for Charlie specifically. To gauge whether an MSO is making good decisions on which state markets they're entering, what factors should be considered beyond market maturity and regulatory landscape regarding timing of medical and or recreational legalization of each state market?
Yeah, I should ask you to read back the last half of that question, but I'll jump in. I think I got it. I could only tell you the way that we look at it, and it's a fairly simple model that we put forward. For us, it's a two-pronged approach. There has to be appropriate regulation. And myself and Adam had a conversation about this a couple of days ago. We're not necessarily, we don't trend medical versus adult. For us, it's always been greater access to cannabis. We've seen societal benefits from greater access to cannabis, and then all of the economic benefits that come with it too. So we're just fans of access to cannabis. And we also understood, and again, this is part of my background and my legal background and in highly regulated industries, it was the regulated nature of it that I figured would allow us to have the most potential upside as an industry, because you had to build that trust, you had to build that comfort level, you had to show the greater population that the sky wasn't going to fall. And in order to do that, you had to have structure, you had to have rules, you had to have testing, you had to have all of these things that would allow that confidence to be built. So for us, it definitely took the path of highly regulated medical that would then lay the groundwork for greater access to cannabis through recreational. But, so long story short for us, we look at states that have appropriate regulations, regulatory structures that put obligations on operators. I think that this is Adam said it very eloquently, and I'm of that same belief. It is a privilege to be part of this industry. And we are standing here on the shoulders of all of that groundwork that has been laid, not only from the sort of the social injustice aspect of it, but all of the advocacy that has gone into getting us to this point now. So the responsible, appropriate nature of a market is how we look at it. Obligations on the operators to be professionals, to be good actors. And then the flip side of that is we look for population. So you have to have the population that has the potential to create a robust marketplace. And that's why if you look at our platform, we're in 9 markets. 7 of those 9 markets are in the top 10 from a population standpoint at either a state or a city level in the country. So that's how we evaluate it. I think if you're an MSO, if you're trying to evaluate like an MSO's decision to go into certain markets, I would imagine that they would want to take that same approach. For us, it's not necessarily limited licenses or unlimited licenses as much as you have to be good actors. And because that's our shtick, right? I think that's what we've brought to our organization is we know how to deal with regulations. And if there's the complexity that occurs because of operations, and if I know that I can figure that out and my competitor might not be able to, that's a competitive advantage for me. So that's how we look at it.
Thanks so much. Any Dov or Adam, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, I think that we, it's not to the MSO, although Charlie touched upon a couple of attributes that are important, and they transcend the MSO group. I agree with Charlie with everything he said about the MSOs. For an MSO, and of course, each one has their own strategy, right? Some of them go deep, some of them go wide. But at the end of the day, when you're looking at investing, there's a lot of very specific areas in this industry that are highly complex that you need to pay attention. So, for example, you need to really develop an expertise in, agricultural accounting, like the treatment of biological assets, for example. It's something that you don't see in other industries, right? And so if you're new to it and you don't know, it could distort a little bit. It flows through the cost of goods sold, and you could see an interesting picture that might not otherwise be what you're accustomed to. Taxation. So companies that have some large tax accruals, that's an indication that they're not paying their excise taxes. They're not paying their taxes as they should, or they're not reserving appropriately. So I would say that there are a lot of things, and Kim asked a question earlier. By no means do we pretend to be experts in Canada, but all of these companies, in addition to their operational focus that they have to have when they're an MSO, you have a layer of complexity with the Canadian public markets, especially the lack of liquidity thereof, and the difference in some of the requirements and behavior of the capital markets there than here.
Thanks so much. It looks like that's all the questions that we have time for, and I'm sorry that we didn't get a chance to get through all of these questions. I know there's a lot of other good ones here. So with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Kim. And thank you so much.
Thanks, Laura. I was going to say we can take these questions offline and maybe get some answers back to you if we can. And really appreciate the time today. We've got a poll that's just popped up on your screen. And so we like this. It helps us design these programs and bring you the information that you're really looking for. And so please be honest and tell us how we did today and anything else that we can help you with as you pursue your investment and strategy in the cannabis space. So any final thoughts, you guys?
Thank you for having us. Thank you to Arcview, to ACG. Thank you, Kim and Michael, and obviously a pleasure, Adam and Charlie. Thank you.
Likewise.
Yeah, definitely likewise. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. And Michael, really appreciate it. Great to see you again. I'll turn it back over to you for closing.
And nice job, Kim. Really nice job.
Terrific. And that's right. I want to echo that. Kim, great job. As I said at the outset, I don't think we could have found a better person to moderate this discussion, the depth and breadth of understanding you have in the industry, your participation there, and just across the kind of entrepreneurial landscape is really kind of unrivaled for this space. So thank you. I'm excited to explore, additional presentations, whether it's a series or that type of thing between ACG Los Angeles and Arcview. I come from a venture capital background and very much interested in where the hockey puck is going. And these conversations, I think, are very, very germane to the institutional investors, private equity, and likewise that are represented in Southern California's middle market in particular. So that's very exciting. So to our viewers, thank you for attending. As Kim said, for those who have questions, please feel free to follow up with Arcview or with myself. We can route those questions to the right people. We'd love to get you networked and connected in this space if you want to learn more. And with that, I wish everybody a good and healthy evening and hope to see you at another event very soon.